Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from a little bit of a break, guys. I haven't had a break for so long, and it was kind of nice. It was kind of by force, actually, because I took a trip to the other side of the United States, to Alaska. And as you might imagine, I didn't have very good connectivity. Like, it was off the grid. So I'm happy to report it was beautiful. It was awesome. I hope to bring you some interviews from that phase, but we are back. I'm back in Brooklyn, and I am happy to introduce this guest that I've known for so long, but from a close distance, if you want to call it that. He is a leadership and education expert, mentor, super connector, and networking guru, a persistent link between people and their dreams. He has conducted school reviews and training for teachers and principals on 3 continents, North America, South America, and Africa, working to increase the number of quality schools and leaders available to low-income children worldwide. He has been a leader in the education sector for 20 years and has more recently pivoted in the direction of sports management. Coming from a family known for professional athletes, he is no stranger to sports and operations. He was an All-American high school and collegiate runner at Georgetown University. Woo, 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 go Hoyas! And he went on to run as an Olympic hopeful before hanging up his spikes to focus on giving back to the communities that raised him. Also known as an advocate for social justice education, he has been nicknamed by some, No Justice, No Peace. And that is the no as in the knowledge in that statement. Mr. Kai Adderley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yay. So let's get started. My first question always is, where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
Awesome. So I am actually back where I am from after 25 years of being in other places. I'm back in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Germantown area to be exact, where I spent a large part of my childhood. My grandparents lived in Germantown. I grew up in Mount Airy. And after my time abroad, did a short stint back in New York and then decided to come on home to Philly.
Okay. And so you're local. And
I am.
That's where you're local. That's where you're from. It's full circle. And what would you say is your craft?
So my craft really is connecting with people. I have a passion for people and getting to know them and connecting them to their dreams, which is a big part of my dream. Just getting to know people and working with them on what they're in love with, and it really drives me. So I more specifically look at that through the lens of my 9-to-5 career, which has mostly been in education, as you mentioned, all levels of education, from teacher to leader, consultant, and also the pivot that you mentioned, the sports world. So connecting people in those 2 places and with each other, because I do think that they weave together very nicely.
Yeah. As a scholar athlete.
Yes.
I remember that you're an athlete, and I also was a track athlete. So yeah. I gotta go into a little bit of the sport since you mentioned it first, but
yes.
we'll get back to it a little bit. So what was your sport?
So, yeah, I mean, as a kid, I, played everything, fell in love with basketball actually, and just always wanted to play basketball all the time. I still do, but being 48 years old now, my body tells me there are better choices to make in life. But at an early age, around 12 and 14 years old, I started being very successful in track. Number 1 in the country. I was breaking national records, so it kind of gravitated to be my dominant sport.
Sure.
My parents believe that running is something that you need to do because it, 1, helps in all sports, being fast and mobile. 2, it's something that you can do well up into your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
It's exercise you can do forever. So it was something that we did not have a choice. We had to run track. And it ended up being, a great passion of mine, and took me to many places in life and the world. So
right. So what was your event?
I ended up specializing in the 800 meters.
Wow.
Once I got to the
okay.
collegiate level.
That's a goddess sport. So my track coach my high school track coach, he would always say, goddess. Ganes.
Yes. The 800 will get you for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
But I ran really from the as a teenager. I ran the 400 on up to cross country 5K.
Sure, of course.
But the 800 was where I found my success at the collegiate and post collegiate level.
Sure.
And now I just run as far as my body will let me.
Yeah, that's me too.
Stay
Me
in shape.
too. Yeah, exactly. I was a triple jumper, so
Yeah.
the jumps were my thing. But like you, I did all kinds of events up until college, and then you specialized. So yeah, that's so awesome that you mentioned that you were an 800 runner. The 800 has since, when I was running, it's become a sprint.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a sprint.
It is definitely a sprint.
And when you were running it, you were a sprint. So I have so much respect for the 400 runners and the 800 runners, because that is an endurance sprint. I think it translates so well into the life that you eventually made for yourself. And so can you think of some of the analogies or some of the ways of thinking in track that have translated into your successes as an educator, first and foremost, and as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is my story, right? Mm-hmm. When I tell it and when I talk about it, and, when I realized that everything that I had learned from what I was in love with, which obviously, was sports. I loved, and still do being competitive and playing sports. Mm-hmm. So you learn life lessons, right? You learn how to win, you learn how to lose, you learn to take care of your body, you learn what makes you, at your best. You learn when you're not at your best, and you still have to push through. So many, I mean, I can probably talk for the rest of the day, and definitely the rest of this conversation, just about the lessons in leadership, the lessons in, winning, losing, being passionate about something. And then how do you go about displaying that to yourself, or revealing that to yourself and to the world? I used to have mentors and other people in my life who sometimes would say things to me like, you must not be that serious about the sport. And I say, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? I love it. And he said, well, if you loved it, people that love it go above and beyond. People that love it don't make excuses. People that love it find a way when there's not a way to continue, in that craft. So it really became like a life mantra, right? If I say that I am in love with running or this sport, then nothing's going to stop me from doing the things that I need to do so that I can be the best that I need to be and stay in love, So, I challenge a lot of folks in my life now in terms of, the leadership coaching and development that I do, or just young kids in general that are working on something that they love. And, there's always obstacles. There's always going to be obstacles. That's really part of life.
Yeah.
You learn that as a adult quickly.
Yeah. and as a young adult too, right?
As a young adult, you graduate from college, you're like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah, right.
What is this? It's always something, as soon as you pay the bill, there's another bill. As soon as, you get the car fixed, there's another issue. So, perseverance is probably one of the biggest words that I take from my life in sports. But again, it was the love for sports and the blend and weaving of the world of education into the world of sports that I fell in love with.
Sure. So let's talk about how you, young man from Philly, graduated from Georgetown.
Yes.
You're still working on this athletic thing. How did you then decide that education was where you were going to land? And tell us a little bit more about that journey, moving to New York.
Yeah. So, I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be a teacher. I never thought it. I grew up in a family where, my mom and my father both were in the social work education space, working in schools, working in boys and girls clubs and the such. So it was always around me. I had family members, my sister ended up being a lifelong educator and teacher, my older sister. So it was around me, but I just never thought that was my way. And what happened was people around me, I think, started identifying the attributes and characteristics that they saw in me that they thought would lend itself nicely to a teaching career. And I still didn't care what they thought. And there was no way. I was like, huh? I just never considered it. As an athlete, you're thinking, most athletes think that their life is going to be filled with, gold medals and
Sure.
Super Bowl rings and
Yeah.
NBA championships, and not understanding as a kid what small percent of people even, move on to Division I sports and get the opportunity to be a professional, and then the professionals, that don't win. So, you're always chasing something. But anyhow, the mentors and coaches and people around me always saw these attributes. And it was, I can identify probably my college coach, Frank Gagliano, who, named me captain of the track team. And it was not because, I was the best runner or anything like that. It was because of my relationship with my teammates. And I was constantly modeling and leading and encouraging them all the time. Whether it was folks that were in my events or different events, it didn't matter. It was just something I loved to do and continue to do. And I was at practice early and I would stay late and I was always talking to somebody about, their craft and learning from them to try to, help myself as well, but also sharing what I knew to try to help them.
Yep.
And so people, again, around me would see this and say, oh, Kai's always teaching, always preaching, always, involved in other folks' journey as well. And so it was my coaches and my mentors that kind of led me on that path and asked me to share my stories and my thoughts with teammates.
Yeah.
And then it was an actual friend who has passed now. She was a Georgetown student and she was a teacher. And she would always say to me, like, you should, teach, you should teach. And I'm like, get out of my face. I'm not teaching. Like, how much do they make again? Like,
right.
And so, once I realized that I was not going to, well, I shouldn't say realized that I wasn't going to be an Olympic champion, but, I never became the Olympic gold medalist.
Sure.
Even though I tried, thinking about what everybody thinks about, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And one day, she came to me, Maya, and she said, look, there's this organization, Teach for America, and you can teach and you don't have to have a teaching certificate or anything like that. You can teach.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about my life and, how I got to Georgetown and how, the experience of being captain for several years on the team. And I was awarded an extra year of eligibility to run.
Oh.
So I had a 5th year. And during that 5th year, I still graduated in 4 years. But in my 5th year, I joined the School of Continuing Studies for a master's degree. That's typical what happens with red-shirted athletes. So anyhow, during that time, I got to select my classes. And all of the classes I picked from what was available often were classes in social and public policy. And I started reading, and taking these classes. And I was had a part-time job at Georgetown's Public Policy Institute. And I was working for a gentleman who was writing a chapter in a book called it was the White and Black Test Score Gap.
Okay.
And I started to read, a lot of the articles and footnotes. And I started to think like, man, these articles are very similar to my experience growing up in Philadelphia. I went to public school. I was awarded a scholarship to a private school and then finished up my high school career back in the public school system at a magnet school. And so I had these 3 experiences of school before I got to Georgetown. And I looked at my, friends all from, Philadelphia that were in the public school system who, the public school system here traditionally has struggled greatly.
Yeah.
And so reading these articles and books, I said, wow, like, this is my life. Like they're telling the story of my life and, how I made it out of, the Philadelphia public school system. And yes, sports was part of it. But also my time in private school was part of it as well.
Sure.
And growing up with, educated parents was part of it as well. And so looking at all these factors and saying like, wow, my dad was the first in his family to go to college. And so like looking at these factors, I started to realize that I wanted to help change the policy. I said, these policies are terrible. And so I thought I was going to go into policy and I, got my degree. I graduated, I hung up my spikes and I said, all right, I'm gonna do this policy work. And I started, my first assignment was to help a charter school actually write their discipline policy.
Oh, wow.
It was a brand new charter school in DC.
Okay.
And, I'm spending all summer reading and getting this policy down, and I wrote it up, and handed it over to the school. And then I said to one of my colleagues or manager, I said, okay, well, now when do we go to the school and like help them, implement this and et cetera? They said, no.
We just write
that's
it.
their job.
That's them.
We write it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what kind of job is that? I said, that's ridiculous. I said, that's like running and never get to race in the meat,
Yeah,
right. And so I instantly was like, I'm not doing this ever. Like, this is terrible. Policy is the worst. So I said, you know what? I will sign up for this Teach for America thing because I wanted now to see, if these policies and ideas that I had in my head about school culture could go from paper to execution, at the school level. Yeah. So I joined Teach for America and taught 6th grade in Washington, D.C.
So this is where our stories really come together is I did Teach for America in D.C. as well. And I taught at Paul Junior High School. Where did you teach?
So I was at Bruce Monroe Elementary School.
Monroe. Okay. Okay.
Yes. Bruce Monroe is now a park. Well, the building is now a park. City Park. We're right up the street from Howard University. Life is such a beautiful journey. The Alchemist is one of my favorite books. And when you just think about all of the experiences you have along the way and how they shape and direct the path. Yeah. Bruce Monroe being a couple of steps away from Howard University really dictated, a lot of what happened afterwards. So, it was a great experience. I taught for 4 years there, 6th grade. Had many, many stories. I can go into some if you like, but I'm sure you can imagine.
So many of the DC young ones, yes. So in the classroom, you did your thing with the 6th graders. And then you were thinking about what's next, right? So then how did you determine or how did that next crystallize for you? Because you said you could tell many stories. I can remember when I knew that, it's a 2-year commitment. I knew that I wanted to go to graduate school, but a big part of that graduate school drive was, funny enough, policy, because I felt like I needed to be more involved with telling or creating the frameworks for my families to do better. Right. So mom, dad, grandpa, whomever was taking care of my kids, they didn't have jobs. They didn't have service. They didn't have the things that I felt were necessary to make this experience in the classroom to be optimized for their children or for their grandchildren or what have you. So then for you, what was it that triggered in your mind? Okay, I'm not going to be in the classroom anymore. I need to move to the next level.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'll probably mention and reference The Alchemist so many times because I really trust the journey. And while we all have passions and I have ideas and thoughts about how things will go, a lot of times they don't go the way you think they should or will.
Right.
So what I've been really good at understanding is that life comes in all different forms and speeds, right? And you need to be able to have the mental aptitude to prepare yourself for whatever's coming. So again, yes, I have goals and dreams, but I never thought about the far-reaching next step because I was so present in what was going on. And when I got called to teach, I really believe it was a calling. I didn't really seek out, how do I become a teacher? It was just like a great friend who ended up passing away a short while after, gave me this message. And I said, and I listened. I spend a lot of time just trying to be still and listen and then follow. Yep. So when I started teaching, I instantly fell in love with the awesomeness of the job. And it was the hardest thing. And I had run, at Olympic hopeful levels. Yeah. One of the best, runners out here and never had done anything as hard as teaching. I'd rather go run 20 miles. Teaching was so hard. Sure. And I remember my practice demo, the summer where you practice and teach for America. You have the 5-week program. And
were you in Houston too?
No, actually, we were in New York. We were one of the first classes to go to the Bronx.
Okay.
And so I was in the 4th grade in the Bronx at Hunts Point. And I remember I had prepared my first lesson and I was ready to teach it. And the model, the mentor teacher was in the back. And I'm not sure exactly how long it was. Let's say it was, 45 minutes to an hour the lesson was supposed to be. So I had it all designed and ready. I get up and there's about, 15 kids and I deliver my lesson and then I stand there and I'm like, whoa, okay, that took like 10 minutes. And I got 40 minutes to go. I was like, what am I supposed to do? And I'm like looking at her and she's looking at me. And I was like, oh my God. And the kids are just like, okay, Mr. Adderley, now what? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what. And so I really, I fell in love with that awesome responsibility to be prepared and be ready for a life, right? Not for making a, croissant or making an object, not taking away anything from people who, build with their hands and create. That is a great skill. But I was like molding a life.
Yeah.
I was like, whatever I say, this child is going to have to, it's going to influence who that child is. And I said, this is too hard. I said, this is crazy. This is too much. And so I instantly felt like that class lesson was a failure. And I said, I have to get good at this. I have to get really good at this because it matters too much.
Yeah.
And so I went in and I went to the school, Bruce Monroe, as I mentioned, and I started to see that the kids didn't even have, well, I shouldn't say they didn't have resources that I thought all schools should have. Right. So it started going back to my policy work and to the work that I read about and the test score gap and growing up in Philly and all of the, again, these life lessons and journeys started colliding. And I started to see like, hey, again, this was me, this was me growing up in Philly, at these schools and I saw myself in the kids and I knew what the resources and people and the tools and the sports that were there that got me out. I wanted to make sure all the kids had all of those things.
Yeah.
And so with the school didn't have them, I just started providing. And so there was no before school care. I created a before school program. There was no after care. So I created an aftercare program. There was no sports. So I started, coaching the kids in sports. It's like everything that I felt that they didn't have, I just started creating. Which I mentioned earlier, being down the street from Howard University really played key into my career and to your question. So in the classroom teaching, I realized that it was too hard for one person. I said, this is ridiculous. I got 25, to 30 kids in this classroom. It's just me, sixth graders.
Yep.
I had one child who came from Dominican Republic, spoke zero English. And, I knew enough Spanish that I could communicate with him, but I didn't feel like I was qualified or fluent enough to teach this kid in Spanish. But we had such a great relationship. He only wanted to be with me. So he wouldn't go to his English, learning class. He just wanted to be with me because he's like, Mr. Adderley cares about him.
Yeah.
So I started to, realize that, yes, the resources and all of the materials that children need in school should be there, number one. But most importantly, they need people that they can build relationships with and talk to and that care about them, most importantly. So I went to Howard University with a couple of kids and a poster board. It said, will you be my mentor? And I signed up a mentor from Howard for every kid in my class. And one, changed the dynamic of my classroom because now every week I had these college students who were majoring in all different things would come in and help me teach, help me manage.
Nice.
And now I had 4, 5, 6 people in the classroom instead of just me.
Nice.
And the kids got excited for it. They came to school more often. They were more attentive because their mentor might be coming that day. So what happened was every kid in the school started asking me, can you get me a mentor? Can you get me a mentor? So now I started building relationships with kids it was a K to 6 school. And so from 6th grade down to, I believe it was 4th. So we had 4th, 5th, and 6th. And I recruited some teachers to work with me, and we created a program called Build, and it was a mentorship program. Bringing understanding, impacting lives and dreams.
Nice.
And that was our mentorship program. And we had over 100 Howard students that signed up and paired up with all of the kids in 4th to 6th grade.
Nice.
And that is when the leaders started recognizing that, Kai was doing something different. Mr. Adderley is doing something different over here.
Mm-hmm.
He actually should be a leader also, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the principal would invite me to her building principal meetings. And when things happened with parents or kids or fights or anything, it's like, go get Mr. Adderley, go get Mr. Adderley. And it just so happened that the KIPP schools in Washington, D.C. were looking at the property to purchase to build a KIPP school in that building.
Sure.
The leader was walking through the building, happened to see my teaching and walked past my classroom and paused and said, "I hope you're a quick learner." And I said, "What?" I was like, who are you? What are you talking about?
Right.
And she gave me a card and she said, write me, email me. I hope you're a quick learner. I think you'd be a great leader. And I was like, what is she talking? Like, I didn't know what she's talking about. I was like, get out of my classroom. I had won the Teacher of the Year award for Washington, D.C. So, again, I was successful at it.
Yeah.
And so I looked at her card. I looked at KIPP. I Googled it, looked it up. And I was like, well, what is this? Okay. And I ended up writing her and I said, well, what is this? Tell me more. And she explained to me that basically they look for teachers who have leadership qualities that they feel they can train to start their own schools. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, okay, let's try it.
Right.
So I applied.
Okay.
So I applied, so I wasn't really searching for a leadership position. Sure. I wasn't doing anything other than trying to impact the children the best way I knew how with all the resources I had. Yep. And I said, well, this opportunity will give me more impact and more resources and I can reach more kids.
Right.
So I applied.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it was that simple. And I think, just like with Teach for America, when I got to KIPP and people heard my story and heard about the trauma and the difficulty that I went through and persevered through, and, sports being a big part of that and being an athlete and the mindset that an athlete brings to the table, the characteristics that an athlete brings to the table, a student athlete, you learn how to win at all costs, right? And so I got offered the position. They were like, hey, and then I remember they said to me, hey, why do you want to open up a school in Brooklyn? Because in New York, it was. I applied for the region of New York. I'm sorry. So the DC leader is the one that proposed this to me. So I thought I was going to go back to DC.
Okay.
And then one of the founders of KIPP, actually, both of the founders put me in a room and said, well, why do you want to, do this in DC? And I said, well, I'd do it anywhere. I said, it doesn't matter where I do it. I said, if I had to pick, I'd do it in Philly because that's where I'm from. Okay. I said, but I could do it. The interview was in San Francisco. I said, I could do it here in San Francisco in the parking lot right outside. I said, I don't care. And they were like, yes, that's the spirit we love. Sure. And they said, well, how about New York? I said, well, let's go. And so that's how, I got to New York to work with, I won't say under, but I worked with David Levin, who was the founder of KIPP schools, along with Mike Feinberg. And I said, what a great opportunity to be able to work alongside one of the founders. So I moved to New York.
Okay. And KIPP stands for Knowledge is Power.
Yes, program. Knowledge is Power program. Because it started as an after-school program.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Okay. So then now you're a school founder.
So I'm a school founder. And I remember,
That's when we met.
That's when we met. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember it was June. I got, the offer to move to New York. And they said, okay, your school's opening next year. And I was like, what? You get a year? That's it? Yeah. And so we just got to work. It was one of the hardest things I've done in my life. Creating from scratch pretty much, along with some of the KIPP model, but creating a school from scratch.
And it's a successful school.
It is. I drove by recently, but I visited over the last couple of years as well. And they are thriving and doing well. And the school now it's K-12 now.
Right.
It was middle school that I started, but it's doing very well there in Crown Heights.
Nice. Okay. So that was your New York experience. And now I want to talk a little bit more about Why the Where. So we like to know, how did you come to be living, working, and playing where you currently are? And you kind of mentioned that, but there's a whole between this leadership position and coming back. There's a whole story. So tell us the Why the Where with the circuit that was in between.
Yeah. So let's see, the most direct way to share this. So it goes nicely because when I founded the school, I wanted obviously to create a school that had the characteristics of all the things that I thought I learned in life that helped me to be successful. So one, I named the school AMP Academy. So it was KIP, AMP, AMP Academy, an acronym. And that acronym stood for Always Mentally Prepared. And it's something that it's my go-to. It's tattooed on my shoulder. And it was before the school. A lot of people think, oh, you got this because of the school. And I said, no, this is my way of life. And something I didn't mention, but when I was teaching a way to supplement my money, I started an athletic mentorship program as well. So when school was over, I started with a buddy of mine, something called AMP Squared.
Oh, okay.
Which was Always Mentally Prepared Athletic Mentorship Program.
Okay.
And so after school, my buddy, Scott McLeod, shout out to Georgetown again, track. We started this program and we would go around mentoring kids in sports and teaching the mindfulness of sports as well.
Sure.
And teaching them that, yes, you might be a great talent, but actually all of the characteristics that you learn through sports is what's going to help you to be a great person in whatever you choose to be.
Yeah.
So, I started with the name AMP because also my family and parents taught me that whatever you do, no matter what you choose to do, you show your passion for it. You need to show up. You need to be excited. You need to be amped for whatever you are doing. So it was the mental approach, but it was also the enthusiasm and the passion. Whatever it is you're in love with, those are the things that should come out. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to teach the kids: how to be amp, how to be mentally prepared, how to be ready. And obviously there was I felt that I got that through physical fitness, but I didn't want to be the black guy with the sports school. Right. So I was trying to figure out a way, like, how does this happen without me saying, hey, this is the sports school? And I actually was going to make our school a theme focused on drama because I think acting brings out similar traits. Yes. And I enjoyed it. I took an acting class at Georgetown, and I think that's part of when I started to realize a bit more about who I was as a person. So anyway, going back to some childhood lessons from my family, I was taught, as I mentioned earlier, we had to run track. Debate was encouraged because you had to learn how to defend yourself with your mind and your words. And the other thing that was encouraged was martial arts. You had to also know how to defend yourself physically. Not that you want to go fight, but you need to. All martial arts, if you start training them, teach you how to get away from danger. If you read the book, The Art of War, it teaches you the way you win a war is by not going to war. So I thought about that in martial arts, and I wanted the school to have all these things, right? And then I said, well, I grew up watching Bruce Lee. These kids aren't going to care about no Bruce Lee. I'm in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. These kids are from Trinidad and Jamaica and Bedford-Stuyvesant. And I was like, they don't know Bruce Lee like I know. I grew up on Bruce Lee. I'm a 70s baby, right? Kung Fu theater and all that stuff. And so I really just started looking up black martial arts. Because I said, well, what's a black martial art? And came in touch with capoeira, realized after going to a class in Washington Heights that it was also the hardest thing physically I'd ever done in my life. It was so hard to finish the class. Yes. Also because of the mental approach that you have to have in capoeira. Because while you're dancing and there's singing and there's, so you're singing, you're dancing, there's music going on, and there's people trying to hit you. So you have to be very prepared and very aware. And I said, man, this is all the things I want to teach the kids all wrapped up into one. The mental preparedness, the physical preparedness, the diaspora of Black people across the world. I said, this is it, all wrapped up in one. And so I became a capoeira guru and just dug into the history and the learnings. And I found a teacher and a Mestre Jalom Vieira, who had wrote a dissertation about how all public schools in New York City, I think this was in the 70s, his vision was that every public school should have capoeira for these same reasons. And so I had never met him before. These were things that just kind of came to me. And then we ended up meeting through mutual friends and people. And I had the first ever mandatory capoeira school in the world.
Okay.
So the kids had to do capoeira 90
Yeah,
minutes a
I
day. They
remember
had
that.
after school
Yeah.
options to do it, but it taught all of those things that I wanted kids to learn to be
Yeah.
successful. And so, again, to answer your question, it's the journey, right? So now I'm just deep in capoeira, running to school. Things are going great. Kids are, doing well in academics because of a lot of the discipline that is taught in
Yep.
martial arts.
Yep.
If you can go run for 10 miles, you can sit down and read a book for 10 hours. It's a lot of hand in hand with education and sports. So I did that for years. And as you know, the teacher, principal, superintendent burn is a real thing. And I wasn't necessarily looking for a break, but I definitely know I was getting antsy, maybe a little burnt out of the same thing every day, and it's the same issues. And I started to reflect on, well, what is it that I love about my role, my job that I do? And the thing that I love the most is the coaching aspect. I love coaching teachers. I love coaching kids. I love coaching other folks and sharing with other folks how I do what I do, why I do what I do.
Right.
And so I started to lean towards, and again, my mentor started to bring me in and say, hey, share your story, Father Kemp, bringing me into his classroom, share your story, share your struggle. How did you transcend through your struggle? And I started to realize that once people could start speaking about their struggle, they were able to deal with it better, to cope with it, to transcend through it. So I made that a big focus. Folks at KIPP started to see me as I was one of the first Black males to start a school in the KIPP expansion. And so other Black leaders came to me to talk and say, how do you do this? How do you do this being Black within a system that maybe is not so Black, even though we're serving Black children? That's a whole nother conversation. And there's a great book that just came out on that as well. But anyway, so I started leaning towards the leadership coaching side of things.
Okay.
And when it was time, and again, I just sat back and listened. When it was time to transition, it was because I was invited to Brazil to do some leadership, well, really sharing best practice from the U.S. in Brazil.
Okay.
And on one of my trips, I was offered an opportunity to stay there and continue to share my best practice. Obviously, they were interested in the school because of the Teach for America connection. And then they were blown away when they saw that I put capoeira to that and used Brazilian culture to create a high performing school.
Right.
So when I was sitting in Brazil, in a place called Apuador on a rock overlooking the ocean, I sat there and just said, wow, I was just offered a chance to move out of the United States. Like I never even thought I would ever do that.
Right.
It never even crossed my mind once.
Yeah.
And, my spirit said, yes, this is what you need to do.
Okay.
So when I think about my journey, you think, how'd I get into teaching? How'd I get into running a school? How'd I move to Brazil? It was the people around me. I kept great people around me that could push me. They weren't people that told me all the things that I wanted to hear. Yeah. They told me the things that I needed to hear.
Sure.
They were people who were doing things that I thought was cool and I aspired to and I learned from.
Yeah.
And these people gave me opportunities. And I always tell people, be nice to people, because when they win that $20 million lottery, you want them to think of you.
Right.
Right? You want to be the person that people think of when great things happen to them.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, here I am sitting in Brazil. I thought I was there for a 2-week trip and got offered a chance to move and live there. And I thought and wrestled with it. I'm embarrassed to say I was debating between moving to Dallas and helping with the KIPP Dallas growth in that region and moving to Brazil. And
some would say no brainer.
Some would say a no brainer, right? I'm from Philly. Like, want anything to do with Dallas.
Right.
So, and I said yes. I remember it was an email. It wasn't a contract. It wasn't a, interview. It was just, hey, you want to come live in Brazil? We'll figure it out. Come down, help us understand education practice and models from the USA. And we're going to, start some schools in Brazil. And I was like, all right, let's do it.
Sure.
And I moved. I said, can I bring my dog? And, they were like, yeah, you can bring your dog. I just got my boy Shango, who was a Rhodesian Ridgeback. And he was he was a little over 1 year old. And again, it really mattered, right? Because there are countries where there isn't reciprocity with animals.
Yes.
And true. So I could have got offered an opportunity to move anywhere. And if they would have had a situation where I could not have taken my pet, I would not have gone. Simple as that. I would not have gone. And so again, like, life, you kind of, I don't want to say you just go with the flow, but you have to listen to your spirit. You have to reflect and you have to listen as opportunities arise. And if they're motivating, you listen a little harder, you pay attention, and so getting a dog was something I always wanted. And I wasn't going to leave him to go move out the country, something I never wanted. So, and it just so happened that, my dog had a Portuguese Brazilian name, that I named him from my capoeira experience. So, and it was just like, it just all started to blend, right? And people are like, oh, you planned this, you planned it. I was like, I didn't really plan it. I just kind of set the sails and paid attention.
Thanks for joining us for part 1 of my conversation with Kai Adderley. Be sure to come back next week where we'll learn more about Kai's travels and Kai's transition into the sports management world. As always, you can catch us at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to check the show notes. They're always so rich and offer so many different resources. Until next time, folks, bye for now.